What they didn't know, what the helicopter pilots couldn't see, was that there were 5 people still clinging to the gear, right underneath the wings, very difficult to see from above. Some of them were up inside the gear well, so there's no way you could even see. And we didn't know until the video came out. It was being live streamed when we started seeing bodies fall from it. This is how I watched them clear. It came out that they're Taliban white robes, so easily identifiable. And they had these 6-foot sticks, like staffs, like huge thick staffs. And I just watched them beat people and just kept pushing people and beating them with these sticks until they finally killed them. And I'm jet number 5, the last one. And I remember taxiing by these guys in all their white robes, and they're waving at me. They're leaving. But you could just sense it, just like knew. This wasn't like a friendly see you later wave. If they knew what the middle finger was, that's what they were doing.
Tower, Dwyer 6 is release you, runway 4 left, 040 at 5, clear for takeoff.
Seat tied, Altimeter 0 eyes, we're clear for takeoff, clear for the airspace. Viper check 2. My Bagram curve was at 354. So yeah, that's on. Next, picture 16, 15,000, Viper 1 target.
Dude, can you give me a quick background of who you are, what you're doing, how you got to where you are today, and then we'll jump into it from there.
Sure. Real quick. SoCal kid, grew up on the beach in a place called Oceanside. Awesome. When high school at Surf PE. Fun place. But I was a wrestler in high school, and I wound up with a wrestling scholarship to Air Force Academy. That's how I wound up in the Air Force, sort of by accident. Didn't know much about the Air Force, especially growing up in a beach town like I was. I credit Top Gun with being a big influence to me, but I was so naive. I had no idea Top Gun was a Navy movie. I thought going to the Air Force Academy was the same thing.
Yeah, it's like the best Air Force recruiting video.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was filmed right there in San Diego, in my hometown. So it was super popular where I grew up. I guess one of at the academy as a wrestler there, and then after graduation, pilot training, C-17s, sort of bounced around. Obviously, like we all do, wound up at the Pentagon for a stretch. Did germane to this discussion, did a long 8-month deployment to Kabul in 2015. And then after that, getting back to the Pentagon, was selected for command down in Charleston Air Force Base, Charleston, South Carolina. That's where I am now. I took command of the 16th Airlift Squadron, did that for 2 years. After leaving that job, I became the director of C-17 Special Operations, sort of like another command. Right after that, I did that for 2 years, and then I just retired. Actually, technically, I retired 1 May 2023.
Yeah, you got the terminal leave. It's always nice. Right. The Special Operations, is that the Sol 2 mission?
You got it. Yeah, that's what it is.
All right. Can you tell me a little about the Sol 2 mission, what that is for a guy who's...
Sure, Sol C-17 Sol 2 stands for Special Operations Low Level 2. It's a little bit of an antiquated name, but the mission said, and the folks who've been a part of it, I mean, this goes all the way, this predates the C-17 even. We're talking C-130s and C-141s eventually, originally, what the mission said. It's become like a brand. So we'll never change the name. Sol 2, we don't really do much of the low-level 2 portion of it these days. It's still a little bit of part of the mission, but it has become such a brand name with the Joint Special Forces that we'll never change it. But it's only located here at Charleston, specialized mission set where we sit alert, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year on a 1-hour short call. So we got guys on a call right now doing that mission ready to respond, just like the Joint Force does, to whatever crises happening across the world. So sort of the top tier of the flying mission here at Charleston.
I'm thinking, we're talking Somali pirates and Captain Phillips and Navy SEALs getting dumped off in the middle of the ocean. That's Sol 2 stuff. Like, that's kind of the... Yeah,
without crossing the line into the, the classified realm, what I'd say is we take part in a lot of operations like that. So yeah. if you hear something like that going on the news, there's a chance that C-17s are a part of it.
I always say with Captain Phillips because I think it's in the movie of Navy SEALs jumping out of a C-17 on the way there. But yeah, awesome mission set. And so your time in Kabul in 2015, you said you did an 8-month deployment. I assume that's a non-flying deployment. You're doing staff type work. Was that
It
related
was, yeah,
to
yeah.
air
I went
mobility?
over there in a staff job, but I wound up as the aide to General John Campbell, who was the U.S. Force Afghanistan commander, 4-star General John Campbell from the Army, and the commander of called ISAF at the time, and then the mission changed to RS, Commander Resolute Support. So I was his aide for a period of time, and then back. So great experience. I was the only Air Force guy on an entire Army joint staff. But in that role, I logged over 100 sorties as a passenger on Black Hawk helicopters during that deployment, and I visited every single FOB in Afghanistan. It was pretty eye-opening. And I mean, nobody likes deploying. Of course, nobody likes being away from the family, but it was enjoyable. I liked it.
Yeah, different world. And so being the aide to, I mean, essentially you're handling a lot of the admin, the day-to-day things for him. Is that correct?
Yeah, you aides aide to camp is the term. We're not decision makers. We are definitely the help, the personal assistant, almost, if you will, carrying a lot of bags and helping to remember things, run calendars, do a lot of logistics. But it's a lot of learning. I mean, a part of the function of an aide camp in all of the military is to get an up-close personal view of what happens at the higher levels of leadership, right? It's a grooming type of job. So while the tasks often are menial and long hours, the learning opportunity is tremendous. And General Campbell was just a phenomenal leader, officer. Such an amazing opportunity to learn.
What do you think you learned most out of that? And then also, interacting as a singleton Air Force dude and amongst the Army, what were some of the challenges there?
Well, the best part probably, I think what I brought to the fight was a very strong logistics background. Surprisingly, right? Us Air Force guys know how to get around. Much bigger picture view of how things work, transiting everywhere. At one point he's the commander of everything going on in Afghanistan. So we had to come all the way back to DC. He had to testify before Congress, and so coordinating all of that types of travel was very easy for me. It was awesome. I know that the Army guys were very appreciative to have an Air Force pilot helping them show the ropes. Yeah. The biggest challenges, of course, is we all speak different languages. The Army's very much mission focused, and I think the reason that I gelled so well with them is because of that. Because they just nobody ever asks you about your background, your career, things like that. Like, can you get the job done? How well do you do the job? Performance speaks for itself. So that part was awesome. But it is the Army, and there were some growing pains. I mean, I worried there first couple weeks on the job that it wasn't going to fit in. I got some a mentor of mine would call it wire brushing, to smooth out the rough edges and become part of that team. That was probably the hardest part, was joining a different type of family.
Yeah, interesting. So did you want to fly C-17s out of pilot training?
Yeah, definitely. And we, going T1 track, no, number one choice for sure. It was amazing. What I really wanted to do was come to Charleston right away. That was my first choice. And looking back on it now, we are so grateful that did not happen, because we got to finish at Charleston, which I can't script that any better. I went to McCord first, which was that wound up being amazing. Obviously the friends and the relationships you build there. And my first squadron commander out there wound up being an 06 wing commander, and pretty critical in my development to becoming a squadron commander much later in life. That was awesome opportunity.
Flying around C-17, what can you talk to me how that your career with deployments, what that looked like, just kind of a broad brush?
Sure. C-17s, it's changed over the years. It's even just changed most recently with the way that we're employing all of our forces in the Air Force. But in general, we're a global airlifter, right? We do a combined strat mission and tactical mission. What makes C-17 so desirable, I think, and so capable, is we can hit the long haul stuff right into a short runway on dirt somewhere in Iraq, right? Take off from here and go all the way there. So we spend a lot of time in the States And then we forward deploy probably once every 2 years to a unit at IUD Qatar, and that's where we do a lot of our forward staging stuff. But it's unique because you'll be deployed flying missions in and out of Iraq, Afghanistan every day, and the C-17 next to you just came from the States, via Germany over there, and is doing essentially the same mission. So, ton of hours, ton of flying, ton of crossing the pond, ton of traveling, 63 countries, 63 different countries I've been to in my career. So that part's pretty fantastic. And then, of course, the majority of it in Afghanistan.
I'm going to ask you what are some of the most challenging places you've been into. But before I do that, I'm going to tell everyone a little story of me riding on a C-17. So I rode on a couple of them into and out of country, but they had the passenger seats, like sit down the center aisle. So those palletized ones. And so, everyone can imagine just like riding on an airliner, but these things are, no kidding, on a flat pallet that get loaded up. And I don't know, maybe it was like 10 rows across, whatever. But the entire time it moved like 3 inches. So the entire flight is just, so if you like fall asleep, you jerk forward and back. These are first world problems, but I guess it's much more comfortable than sitting in like the C-130 in the webbing, the web seats. I've done that before, less enjoyable. But talk to me about some of the challenges when you're going into 63 different countries. And also taking a big old heavy plane into these spots. What are some of those unique challenges?
Probably the planning stuff. I mean, the flying of the jet is super fun, right? It's flies with a stick, incredibly capable. We say, I tell folks all the time, there's no such thing as too fast, and there's no such thing as too high in the C-17. We can land from just about anywhere. It is remarkably capable and super fun because of that to fly. So a lot of challenges come in like the planning aspect. If you're going to 63 different countries, that's a lot of different rules. Every country's got different rules. C-17 is a heavy airplane with a very big wingspan, making sure you can get in and out of these super remote places. You're flying to a base in Africa, and the last time a C-17 went there was 2 years ago. So doing airfield studies on that kind of stuff, right? We've all got horror stories in the community of folks hitting things on the ground, unfortunately, or you land and the asphalt is coming up and there's huge fog damage. And the C-17's got 4 enormous engines. You throw those things in reverse thrust and they'll suck up everything that's around it. So those are probably the hardest things to overcome. That and anytime you're working with foreign governments, you get into tip clearance issues, things like that. We fly from in and out of countries that we're friends with, but they may not be friends with each other. India and Pakistan, always a pain flying over in that area, and very difficult to go from one of those countries to the other country. And so working that stuff out was always a challenge. And then, of course, getting into some of the more tactical stuff. C-17s do get shot at. I mean, we for all of our tactical stuff, the fact of the matter is it is a big airplane. And when we're landing, we're not going very fast. And it's and for a 5-minute period, once you're in the WES and the weapons engagement zone, you're almost a sitting duck right there. Those are, there's only so much you can do with an airplane that size to be tactical. The rest of it, you're just going to take it.
Yeah, what's impressive now that I fly big old fat planes around, seeing what a C-17 can do with like a tactical approach to landing where you're very steep, spiraling down, or just very steep, maneuvering or climbing out. Like, it's impressive to see that. And there are stories. I don't know, like there's probably a C-17 that's had some pretty significant damage, but I know is it DHL, the one that was out of Baghdad, they got hit by shoulder fire, surface to air missile. I mean, those guys spun it around. Like, that's a pretty iconic story. But again,
we've had 2 C-17s take man pads.
Okay.
It was early on. That was early on in Afghanistan, before we got enough boots on the ground to sort of eradicate that kind of stuff. But the biggest issue for us is small arms. Who doesn't own an AK-47 in either of those countries? Right. It seems like everybody does. And we've all seen RPGs launch at us. We're flying with night vision goggles. And so you'll see an RPG launch. The good thing about RPGs, it doesn't track, right? It's like essentially a big flying bullet. And so you may see them, but I don't recall anybody getting hit. But we've had a lot of C-17s take small arms damage as well. Armored cockpit, one or two tragedies have come out of that, but not anything overly.
Yeah. Flying around in Blackhawks as a passenger 100 times, that's a little more spicy.
I love it. I thought that was great. I thought it was super cool. I mean, those guys out there, you're talking about real pilots. Helicopter pilots are real pilots. Those guys are amazing.
Yeah. I was casual in the 41st Rescue Squadron. That's Combat Search and Rescue, H-860s, and still friends with a lot of those guys to this day, but hearing some of their stories, seeing some of those stories in the news. I had Shiner on the podcast who he got a DFC, and you like listen to his story of these guys rescuing a bunch of dudes who needed help. You got A-10 strafing overhead, and they're just getting lit up. Yeah, Shiner has like an incredible story. I'm like, and I didn't know this too. Like the, medevac Army helicopters are unarmed. I guess it makes sense with, and you're like, so you're going to go land in a firefight, big old helicopter, like Taliban doesn't care. They want to shoot you down. So
for sure.
Spicy. And again, those things are just shaking themselves apart. So you got to be a good pilot to hold it all together.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Well, hey, I want to pivot and talk kind of towards the end of your career here, and then we'll traverse backwards to the beginning, but integral part, whether you knew it or not in the beginning, but definitely played out that way with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. So can you talk to me leading up to us leaving Afghanistan? What were you doing? What was your job at that time?
Sure. So the C-17 community was, August 31st was the deadline. That was the, cutting to the end. I flew the last plane out of Afghanistan, and we got airborne right at midnight local on August 31st. Funny side. Remind me of that funny side story. That was a coincidence. But leading up to that, in like the 3, 4, 5 months prior, C-17s were super busy, closing down base after base after base. We're getting rid of, we're shutting down everything. And we had such a large presence over there that was a very large, long, normal operation, a retrograde. Systematically closing bases, essentially from the outskirts of the country, collapsing into Bagram and Kabul. And what we were seeing as we were doing that, we would leave a base and leave it in the hands of the ANA, the Afghan National Army, and within days it was in the hands of the Pentagon or the Taliban. And so we saw this coming as we closed the base and collapsed inward. We just were watching the Taliban march inward. And so when we got to the very end of Kabul, the last base we left open, base we closed just prior to that was our largest base. That was Bagram Air Base. Bagram is enormous.
Is that June time frame?
Yes, it was July 1st. July 1st, we closed it. I got to take part in that operation as well. That was a deliberate action operation. And at the time, there were questions, should we close Bagram? Because it was such a strategically important base to us. It was huge, had a huge perimeter, huge runways. We had an enormous military presence there. And knowing what we know now, we much rather would have been using the Bagram Air Base runway. The decision to close Bagram came basically because of its size. Two significant things going on with Bagram. Enormous perimeter. And the Taliban's coming. So we would have had to plus up the security at Bagram. We would have had to fly in troops, 2,000 troops, something like that, if we wanted to keep Bagram open. And so that, from like a leadership decision, I understand why they didn't do that. The second significant thing about Bagram is it's got Parwan Prison. Parwan Prison is the largest, it's the Gitmo of the Middle East. Okay? It is the largest terrorist prison anywhere over there. And arguably worse people in it than Gitmo. And it sits inside, sort of up on one side of the base, but inside the gate has its own gates there as well. And so understanding that there's a lot of people in Parwan that we don't want to be dealing with, and that we would have to bring in more troops to secure Bagram, the decision was made to leave Bagram first. Probably a good decision, at least an educated decision at the time. Like, it wasn't a mistake at the time to close Bagram. But that did end up, in hindsight, creating a lot of the problems that happened at Kabul. We went down to one runway. Kabul is a single runway operation. Closed Bagram on July 1st. It did not take long for the Taliban to get to Kabul. And in the middle of August, as part of the alert mission we have here in Seoul 2, we got to learn to go support some stuff happening over there. You know, we still had a U.S. embassy in Kabul. In addition to the military presence, State Department diplomatic stuff that we needed to go assist in. So we launched out of here in the middle of August. And within a day of us taking off out of here, the Taliban had taken the city of Kabul. I woke up, I landed over there. I landed in the Middle East. We took off from here, flew direct, double air refueling all the way over to the theater. We land in the morning, and the president of Afghanistan had left. You remember that? President Ghani had gotten in a plane and abandoned the country, and that's when we knew, all right, that's it. It's now in the hands of the Taliban. 24 hours after that was when the panic and the chaos of Kabul happened. So we, United States of America, had said, hey, we are leaving. Kabul is the last place open. We are going to bring out anybody who wants to get out, essentially. Anybody who can prove that work for the United States in some capacity, and your families, we will bring you out, knowing that the Taliban would probably murder them if they found out that they were assisting. The problem was, I think the civilian population of Kabul, it was panic. They heard that we were leaving. I don't think they fully understood that we had some time to get them out of there. But I took my small team in there, 3 C-17s. We landed in Kabul, and surprisingly, we actually were bringing in some folks to help plus up security. And as I'm getting ready to leave, somebody comes running out and says, "Hey, can you take all these people with you?" And we said, "No problem. Yeah, bring it." And so there was a whole bunch of Afghan interpreters, all Afghans, but they all spoke English. You could tell that they worked for America, and they were leaving. But these folks have cell phones, and so they get on our airplane to leave, and I guarantee they're texting people they know in the city of Kabul saying, "Hey, I'm on a C-17. I'm out of here. The Americans are leaving." I mean, that was the moment the panic happened. Everybody rushed the airport. Heard any of the stories what was going on in the city? It was a mad rush for the airport, and the airport is split. One runway down the middle. On one side is the American Air Base. On the other side, it's Kabul International Airport. A lot of security on the American side, almost no security on the international side. I mean, the fence is falling down. You've seen it. It's like an airplane graveyard over there. So they just rushed through the fence and just massed on the airfield. I mean, they went from the international side, this sea of people, an enormous amount of people, rushed over the runway and just covered the entire ramp. I had just taken off. There's 3 C-17s on the ground, and they were surrounded. And this is a story of the 1 C-17, that famous photo that came with the 830 passengers. They were engines running with the ramp down, middle of loading, when all of those people surrounded them, and they just crowded in the airplane. I mean, Google the picture of 830 people on a C-17. It's incredible to look at. Those pilots were faced with a pretty tough choice. I think the pilots of the other 2 aircraft didn't have engines running, and so they did what everybody else did, sort of took shelter in the buildings that were nearby there, because it was hysteria and panic and chaos. These guys with engines running couldn't just abandon their C-17, and so they made a decision, a pretty courageous decision, I think, to close up the doors and get out of Dodge, and they just taxied out and took off. Did some quick math, 830 people, average weight 200 pounds. Okay, we can handle that much weight. We can take off, and they just bolted. And that was nuts. That entire crew earned DFCs. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, here's what I envisioned when I saw that too, is not being not coming from that world, right? But I envisioned it's probably, I mean, maybe it's, no, you can tell me, but it's 2 pilots in their late 20s, early 30s ish. And you probably have 2 loadmasters in the back, and this just unravels in front of them. And I'll be honest, the cynic in me, when I saw that, I was like, these guys are going to get Q3'd, which is, a ding on their check ride, or, get not their check ride, right? But have to go and do another check ride again. Somebody follows you for the rest of your career because I'm like, they loaded up this plane. People don't have seatbelts. And that's like the cynic in me. And obviously the good part out of this is they got what they deserve, which is distinguished flying crosses, because a heroic.
We were all worried about that as well. You're right, man. We all had those same thoughts. We saw it happen. It's interesting, the radio call that they made after they got airborne and we're headed back to Al Udeid, Qatar, Al Udeid Air Base, our main operating base over there. They made a radio call reporting, hey, heads up, we're bringing 800 people back. And that radio call made the internet before any of the pictures or anything else did. It was crazy. And it hit the internet within hours. It got out there so quickly, it was nuts. And you could hear the air traffic controller was just incredulous. How many people? It was amazing. And we all kind of a little bit cynical, I think, too, and like these guys didn't get in trouble, but they didn't. Not only did they not get in trouble, they were rewarded for making a very difficult but courageous decision, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
that's what they get paid to do, and unfortunately, it feels like, again, the cynic and what you hear is like more often times than not in what you feel, and I think there's probably some truth to it, a culture of CYA, that they could have very, very easily roasted that crew for doing that. But that's what it should be, and that's what
we get paid for, right? We
that's what it should be.
That's right. We get paid for exercising judgment. We don't get paid for everything going right all the time, right? I mean, a lot of pilots say being a pilot's really not that hard. It's not really that hard to fly an airplane, but it's for when everything goes wrong. Paid for your experience and judgment and the lessons learned to get to that point. That was a great example. And and there was more. Unfortunately, it got worse after that. Right? You would think that would be the worst thing that happened, and it wasn't. So, when all those people came across the road, we had an American presence there, obviously. And if you read about what was going on, sort of behind the scenes on the ground, not from the flying picture, it was Army and even some Air Force, contingency response folks who were out there, saw that sea of people coming, and we deployed Humvees almost like a skirmish line. We deployed a perimeter of people out there. I think in some cases, not really knowing any of these folks, just thinking about it from like a military leader perspective, a command perspective, somebody made a great decision to collapse that line because it became pretty obvious that it was civilians. Probably a lot of very nervous young people, Americans, young soldiers with guns, watching that sea of people come out. And that could have been one of the darkest times, I think, in American history. Somebody there made the decision to, guys, we're not stopping this. And they collapsed everything, and everybody just went and took shelter in buildings and let the civilians sort of, best decision there, let the civilians come across. The 830 aircraft happened, and then it got worse after that. Very interesting. I can't think of another type of military operation that was filmed live on Twitter, but this one was, right? All the Afghans had phones. They were connected to the internet, and all this stuff came out on Twitter. And this is all going, I told you I had just taken off. The crew with 830 packs was maybe 2 hours behind me, and then about 2 hours behind that was I just landed, rushed into the JOC, we call it, the Joint Operations Center, and I'm watching this like live now. We got cameras everywhere, right? Got all the secret live feeds of everything. And there's a C-17 that is surrounded, and they're also trying. Now they hadn't done any loading. They were trying to download stuff when this happened. They were in a fortunate position where they hadn't shut down engines, they hadn't opened anything, so nobody else was on board, but their aircraft was surrounded. They were trying to figure out what to do. And so after talking to some of the folks on the ground, they decided that they would leave. So they started taxiing out, and the mob, this is the video that went viral, the mob is just running alongside their C-7, just jogging. So, they're surrounded. They're climbing all over the gear, right? There is probably 20 people clinging to the aircraft as it's taxiing. And at the same time, we're trying to figure out how to disperse this crowd. So we brought in a couple Army helicopters. You can see them in the video flying in really low to try to scare the crowd away. They're dropping what we call non-legals, flashbangs, things like that, to try to get the crowd to disperse. And nothing worked. They were not leaving. They were so desperate to get out of there and so determined that nothing was going to from that C-17. And so,
no passengers were on that C-17.
No, our U.S. passengers,
right? But no,
not
folks,
like the we were bringing in. Yeah, they never downloaded, but no evacuees.
And just to paint real quick, paint the picture too. So obviously the first one that loaded up, or the second one, I guess, that had the 830 passengers. Obviously they're wrong place, wrong time. The doors open and they get bum rushed. Yeah. But this crew, I think you mentioned all the crews kind of hunkered down inside of a building. And I imagine that's inside the skirmish line. So somewhat protected.
Yeah, well, for this particular crew, they never got out of their they never shut down engines. So they were, imagine C-17s in various positions. There's one C-17 that its engines are shut down, and everybody swarms the airplane so they can leave. You're not going to leave an airplane with its engines running, but this airplane's not started, so they leave. They get inside a building. Then the aircraft with 830 passengers has engines running and the ramp down.
Okay,
so they get swarmed. And this third airplane has engines running, but none of the doors are open. So nobody can get on board. Now they're just surrounded on the outside. And it's not necessarily 1, 2, 3 in that order. There's more time that has passed and a few other aircraft involved in this, but that's the gist of it. Yeah, and so these folks, and they're also in a really difficult spot. Like, what do? They don't want to open the doors now. They don't want to shut down their engines and open the doors and get swarmed. So they're sitting there with engines running, and there's some coordinating that goes on. These guys are on the radio. Nobody here is making like decisions in a vacuum. We're thinking through this problem. Like, what do we do? And hey, let's try to taxi and take off. Let's sort of see what happens. And so you see them taxiing, and the mob just follows them. And then they take the active runway. They pull out onto the runway, and the mob surrounds them on the runway. As a matter of fact, somebody brings an old guy in a wheelchair and parks the wheelchair right in front of the runway so that they can. And they sit there for a while, and the helicopters are trying to disperse the crowd, and just nothing is happening. And so they, after waiting it enough time, the wheelchair person gets moved. So they decide, a runway is 2 miles long, right? A normal runway. I don't think people really appreciate how long runways can be.
Yeah.
10,000 foot runway out there. That's almost 2 miles long. So they start taxiing really slow, make sure all, the people can see the aircraft moving and not going too fast so they're going to hit anybody. And they just taxi for 2 miles, and of course the crowd can't keep up. They can't keep up. The only way the crowd got dispersed was they didn't have the endurance to keep up with the C-17 on its 2 mile taxi down the runway. So they get down to the other end and they turn around, and meanwhile the mob is parked about halfway down the runway, still on the runway, about halfway down. And they talk to the helicopter pilots, and they do. The helicopter pilots, from what they can see, the airplane's totally clear. And they do a little bit of math. They can see how far down the people, very clearly, right? There's runway markings. They look down there. They say, those people are at 6,000 feet. It only takes us about 4,000 feet to rotate. So they decide to take off, make a decision to take off. What they didn't know, what the helicopter pilots couldn't see, was that there were 5 people still clinging to the gear, right underneath the wings, very difficult to see from above. Some of them were up inside the gear well, so there's no way you could even see. And we didn't know until the video came out. It was being live streamed.
Right.
When we started seeing bodies fall from that season. So I think three bodies fell off right away. And the craziest thing to me is there's a video of a 20-year-old Afghan national soccer player. And he's just a kid. And the story I read about him later was that he was texting with his family and he was excited. I got on one. I'm out of here. Like, I'm going to make it. Not having any understanding that even if you can hold on to an airplane going 500 miles an hour, you're going to be at 35,000 feet and freeze or stuff. I mean, it's just, there's no surviving that. It's not a very educated place. So the tragedy to me is that kids like him, he thought he made it, right? He thought like this was a good thing that he was clinging to the outside of his defense. And he fell. A couple other people fell. I think 2 others were up under the gear well, and they died en route, essentially. Unfortunately, some graphic and gory videos came out of that as well. But horrible, right? That was by far the worst day. Actually, that was the second worst day. It gets worse after that. That was the chaos. That's how it happened, and then now we're stuck with like, okay, what do we do?
I do want to highlight, bring a little positivity out of that one segment, which again, it's horrific, but again, the crew like sitting there and being pilots and making a decision, like looking down the runway, like, hey, that's about 6,000 feet. To me, I know again how big of a deal it is for takeoff and landing distance and just all the minutia that goes into it. But them sitting there and making a decision to launch when they don't have a full picture, it's like, hey, this is about right. And again, like you mentioned, like I know it's at the forefront. Like unfortunately, I kind of grow up in a culture, and I think it's, my perception from the cargo world, it is typically like hand out a Q3 and then ask questions later. Not all the time, right? But there are a lot of those horror stories there, and I imagine, and probably at that point when you're getting surrounded, that's probably the last thing.
Yeah, I'll give credit to our leaders during the entire 16 days or whatever it was for the Kabul evacuation. Credit to our leaders for not doing that, for not second guessing the crews, for letting pilots be pilots, for not Monday morning quarterbacking everybody. And when we did do that, when we did do some Monday morning quarterback, it was to prevent it from happening again. It's like, how do we do this better? But nobody, there was not a single Q3 that came out of any of that. So that part's really good. And this crew, they happen to be good friends of mine, younger guys that I commanded, as a matter of fact. They also earned Distinguished Flying Crosses. But from the moment they took off until they were actually pinned on DFCs, the Air Force completely failed them. So they had fatalities. They had 5 fatalities on board. That is a big deal. So they landed, and OSI took over. Office of Special Investigation, detectives, whatever. Mostly, if you ask me, mostly wannabe FBI guys. And they're not cool about anything. And they essentially, they didn't confine them, but they were grounded immediately. They spent a week or something like that, living in a little hooch tent thing at Al Udeid, not flying, getting interviewed 10 times a day, feeling like they were criminals, being treated like they were criminals. And then they got flown home. They couldn't even fly themselves home. They got flown home. Obviously, this because this came out on Twitter and everything was all over the news. There were multiple news articles. This investigation went on. It went on for a year. A year.
That's ridiculous.
The way that they found out they were cleared was somebody wrote an article. Nobody in the Air Force picked up the phone and called these guys and said, hey, just let you know nobody. They found out on the internet. Unbelievable to me. Unbelievable leadership failure all over the place to let that happen.
That is ridiculous. One
person I'll give credit to is General Minahan, who's now the AMC commander. He was not the AMC commander during the Kabul evacuation. But he's a warrior at heart kind of guy. I love him. I think he's one of the best generals I've ever come in contact with, and I'm so happy for the Air Force that he's commanding that now. He fixed it. He heard. I actually had an opportunity to talk to him, and I told him the story about these guys who I'm close to and what was going on in their life, and the fact that I straight told him, boss, you want to know how these guys found out that they were clear? I said the internet, and he hated it. He hurt for them, and so he did. He called them. He actually had, when he pinned on DFCs, he met with their families, wives, kids, parents, everything at that ceremony, and he apologized. I saw him hug one of the guys. And then so he, unfortunately, this was over a year later now that this happened, but at least somebody in the chain of command finally addressed it.
But think about how, I know you thought about this, obviously. I'm thinking, it makes me mad just sitting here thinking about it, that this is like a pretty clear cut, like, oh, I watch Twitter, I see what's going on. These guys are in the wheel well. Like, obviously this crew, they didn't murder these guys.
Right.
So this is a pretty clear cut, like, yeah, you guys are no longer involved. It turns out we need to look at something else over here of like how this actually went down and led to this. Right. Yeah, that's really unfortunate to hear it. I got one buddy who has an OSI story where he was in Korea as a, young F-16 pilot. At that time, the squadron took a squadron trip to China to go shopping, came back, right? Finishes his tour in Korea, goes to Hill, comes back to Korea. Now this is like 4 years later, redoing a security investigation, says he did this. He ended up going through multiple lie detector tests with OSI, all sorts of stuff, because they thought he was hiding something. You're like, you guys, and it eventually left with him just walking out after like an 8-hour interrogation. He's like, I'm not an arrest, I'm leaving. He stirs the pot, and finally got to the point where, but yeah, where you said like, not all, I'm sure, but kind of wannabe FBI agents. It's like, they don't get to do anything super exciting. And now It's like, oh, we finally can rake someone over the coals. That's
it's hard to police your own. Like, I get that. I appreciate that. Like, it is, they are the cops for us, essentially, right? That's like, they're not arresting non-Air Force people. Like, this is all they deal with. But man, it is, I agree. It is tough.
When you hear something like that, that's where you hope that there have been common sense that have been sprinkled in someone very quickly in that process, because obviously that investigation is getting briefed to their leadership and be like, oh yeah, there's actually nothing here. We don't even need to be bothering these guys.
Yeah.
Because I can't even imagine getting out of the plane to do the walk around the post flight, right? Like those guys had to deal with that. Some pretty horrific and graphic things. Now to have that hanging over their head for a year, are they going to go to jail?
Yeah, and it was, and there's some real like PTSD stuff on that. I mean, I'll share just a couple of the graphic things that drive that point home of what these guys did have to do with this. Climbing up under the gear well, they didn't know, and so they raised the gear 4,000 pounds of hydraulic pressure. Nothing is going to stop that gear from closing. And the body did get stuck half in, half out. And it could be seen, the body could be seen out the window, the entire length of this flight. And so they knew. There actually was another body they didn't know. And, they reported what was going on. And so they had to do a pass over the airfield where they were going to open the gear, expect body parts to fall out so that we don't want to do this for a foreign country. Whatever, what a crazy decision somebody had to make along the chain. Like, hey, let's make sure we open the gear over the runway so we can collect the body parts, right? That's somebody who made that decision. Crazy.
Yeah.
So they had to do that. And other body parts fell out that they didn't know about. And they landed and there were other body parts. And yes, this was a graphic, horrible, horrible situation that they went through. And you imagine what they're feeling. Like they would not have taken off had they known there were people there. But now they're also dealing with levels of guilt with this kind of stuff, They made the right decision with all of the information they had in a chaotic situation that the world has never seen before. Right? There's nothing like this has ever been seen before, and certainly not caught on camera. Yep. And having to just deal with all of that all at once, been a tough time for that crew. Everybody deals with everything different. They're back flying. They're all flying now, by the way. They're all still active pilots. Things are back to normal for them. They're great guys, but they're going to carry that with them for a while. And then for their own team, their own family to treat them the way that they did, just inexcusable.
Yeah, man, that's infuriating. I hate that for them, but
yeah,
that's where the cynical part comes, because you hear stories like that, and unfortunately, they're like, it exists. But I'm glad they all got DFCs, and hopefully, that's a little bit of a pat on the back for doing some pilot shit.
Yeah.
Are you done at that point? Is everything over? Where are you now?
Yeah, that just got started.
Time.
We're still in the first 24 hours of that happening. August 16th or 17th. I sort of forget the times. You know, it is flying like days. I would fly all hours of the day, so I don't even remember when it turned to the next day or not. But we got to work right away. We, the United States military, got to work right away containing that situation. So C-17s got super busy here. We activated the Army's contingency response force, right, the 82nd Airborne. We flew them in. So we did this enormous plus up anyway, right, to get some perimeter, get some additional security, bring some order to the chaos there, trying to meet this August 31st deadline. And then we actually it did get to the point where Kabul was very orderly. And it was a mess everywhere else. I mean, at the end of it, right, it was 124,000 people that came out. I think C-17s carried over 100,000, 110, 120,000, 275 C-17 flights, basically. So it was chaos everywhere. But once we got Kabul, once the 82nd got in there, and the Air Force Contingency Response Wing got in there, they're the combat airport guys. It was very orderly. Like we got to the point where we would land, and there's some other photos that have come out of that too, of where it got very, very orderly. We had settled on a number. C-17 normally holds 102 passengers. You can get more than that if you bring in centerline seats, but that's not a common thing. So normal C-17 is 102. That one flight had 830. We eventually settled on 450. So we were floor loading everybody, no seats, no seat belts, but basically we could load them up in rows. Everybody would sit Indian style, and putting 450 people on there. And then that became kind of orderly, not without its challenges. So this one is not talked about very often. We had to create a diagram for how to use the bathroom, for how to use the top toilet. This is not a common thing. Indoor plumbing is not a common thing over there. And so 450 people is a packed C-17. I mean, it's packed. It's, 830 was packed. Like 450 still, like, it's amazing to me to look at it, like how there's that many people on a C-17. And there's one bathroom and they don't know how to use it. And it was, gosh, you want to talk about like a range of emotions. Okay. You land in there and we're like doing this routinely. This isn't even my mission yet. This is just, every time a C-17 lands, it brings people out. So I'm doing my own mission, but we're like, hey, we have an empty C-17, fill it up kind of thing. And so you see this, all these people load up, and what struck me was how many young families there were, how many little kids, like under 10 years old, 5 years old, like just a ton of kids. And like, you just feel great about it, right? You feel like you're doing this awesome thing. I would watch them come on board and they would sit down and the little kids would just pass out in like relief. Like, I don't know what they've been going through, what it took to get to the airport, but you could just see the tension leave them and they just looked freaking passed out and you felt awesome about it. And then you take off and like 2 or 3 hours later, it's the most disgusting, unsanitary environment you've ever been a part of. And you have a real hard time not being disgusted. It got so bad that it was causing a problem. We'd have to hose down the C-17s. We would land and the people would leave and we'd have to like sanitize the C-17 somehow. And it was taking forever to do that. It was like delaying us. So somebody got this idea to fly in from the States, like all this industrial plastic. And so we would take off from Al Udeid, 3-hour flight to get to Kabul. And before we picked everybody up, we would line the entire C-17 cargo compartment with plastic. And then when we got off, we would pull the plastic down and it would just get hosed off and we could bring more plastic on it. And we talked about these like little things that like, whoever would have guessed that you needed a diagram for how to use a toilet? And that's the kind of stuff that we're dealing with, And other crazy things too. On one flight, everybody can picture, I'm sure anybody listening to this can picture an aircraft latitude. I don't care what airplane you're on, they're all relatively similar.
One each.
That's right. One for 450 people is tough. And then at one point, a young Afghan woman goes in there She's in there for a while, and there's some sort of like commotion. One of the loadmasters goes down there. He won't come out. At this point, nobody speaks English either. You're lucky if you have one or two people. That's the first thing you do. They board up. We'd ask, does anybody here speak English? And that became our interpreter for the flight. We found out this lady was in labor. She gave birth in a C-17 bathroom on her way from Kabul to Qatar. Pretty crazy. So these are all the crazy things that are like going on when you're dealing with it. What awesome side note to that story, that family named their baby Reach, which was the call sign of the C-17. So that is very.
Gosh, can you? I can't even fathom this.
Yeah, man, that's crazy. That's crazy. And then unfortunately, those people all got to go somewhere. 120,000 people got to go somewhere. And the State Department had decided, well, they're not coming to the United States until we vet them, right? We're going to vet these people first because, who knows? They could be bad actors. And the processing facility became Al-Udeid Air Base Qatar, which is also where all of the pilots are living at the time. So many people got evicted. I mean, it was, Kabul was up in the mountains of Afghanistan. Actually, take away the fact that you're in Kabul, Afghanistan, it is a very pretty place, surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. Middle of the summer, so it's 75 degrees and sunny every day. It's fantastic. Al-Udeid Air Base Qatar is not that way. 120 degrees, real temperature, humidity. It is the desert. It is blinding white sand, so bright that you have to you cannot open your eyes. Not an exaggeration. It's so bright you cannot open your eyes. And we're landing with all these people on board, and the backlog, they couldn't handle it. Al-Udeid could not handle that many people coming in and processing. And so if you ask me, like the most frustrating part for us was he would land. We had, the worst, this didn't happen to me. I think ours was 2 or 3 or 4 hours, something like that, but 6 hours. The crew landed, 450 people on board, 120 degrees outside. We all know airplanes, air conditioning don't work on the ground. 6 hours they waited to deplane their passengers. And unfortunately, like you're, talking about the range of emotions, you're happy with these people, you're excited that you're doing something good for these young families. Then like 3 hours later, you're kind of disgusted by, sanitary issues. And then you land, and now I've been hours on the ground, and everybody's frustrated. The crew's frustrated. These people are frustrated. You would be too. Like, I have sympathy for them. Anytime we're trapped on an airplane on the ground for an hour when you're flying, on America or whatever, it's frustrating. Well, it's like 6 hours, and it's 1,000,000 degrees outside. It got, unfortunately, there was some violence and medical emergency. People passing out. I don't think anybody died. We got really close. To having people die in the area that's supposed to be safe. We did a very poor job at Al-Udeid.
Now, I mean, there's some limitations because I went through Al-Udeid for just 3 weeks doing an LNO stint, the liaison, when I was deployed. I remember talking to the tanker crews. They were going in and out every single day, and they were having to clear customs, even though you're on a U.S. base, right? You're in another nation's. Like, we don't have to deal with that most military bases that are in other nations, but they were still having to clear customs. So the Qataris did add a layer of bureaucracy. And I imagine, too, they're probably concerned about 100,000+ refugees.
You're right about
that.
Processing factor? Customs at Al-Udeid is the absolute worst. I mean, you'd be deployed there. Yeah. Deployed there, living there, right? I'm living there, and you have to process customs in and out every time you go fly, like on a daily basis. It was really frustrating.
And if you look funny at them, or I heard guys who laughed in line, and the Qataris thought they were making fun of them, and then
those stories are all true, and you get expelled, you get blackballed. Very particular. In this case, we did work it out with the Qataris. Okay, we did not process customs during the evacuation after the first few days. What we worked out with them was something like, I don't know all the details behind it, but we set up an interim processing facility at a hangar. So as long as people were staying in this general area, there was no customs. Okay? And we eventually built a city out there. There's a ton of folks at Al-Udeid Air Base. The folks who weren't going forward literally built a tent city, and we surrounded it with barbed wire. I actually have pictures of this. It's one of the things that I like to see. the MWR, the morale folks out at IUD. I took a picture of this. It is a barbed wire fence. Looks like a refugee camp, essentially, or maybe a prison. It's where all the evacuees are, but they had put up 3 enormous bounce houses for the kids. And so it's the middle of the day, and it is 1,000,000 degrees outside. I don't know how the kids were doing it, but the place was packed, and I heard laughter. It was like such a cool thing to see. But that's sort of what we built out there, which is good. But we did struggle mightily in processing the passage. It was a great frustration to me. I talked to some of the leadership at IUD at the time because it was causing massive delays. Here's the bottom line. The delays, waiting for 6 hours after you've landed from a 20-hour day is brutal. Right? You've already been flying all day. You just dealt with everything you dealt with in Kabul, and now you land and it's going to take 6 hours. Like, it is very mentally taxing on people. And so here's what is the great impact to that? Well, that eventually impacts the mission. That increases risk to the mission for something bad happening on the mission. We're already getting less sleep because who knows where we're sleeping. It's already 1,000,000 degrees outside, and now we're dealing with this at all. Like, you are literally like, this is the safe place, and the safe place is making it riskier to do our jobs. That was my biggest beef. So I went and talked to some of the leadership. I happen to have a friend there. And my greatest frustration with it was what they told me was, the State Department's not letting us process these passports. He threw a number out at me. He said, we are, that 12,000 people came in today and only 800 left. So that is a massive problem. I understand. However, Al Udeid Air Base is 30 minutes from Doha. Doha just hosted the World Cup. And this isn't third world country business anymore. There are many things we could have done. We could have purchased bathrooms, tents, air conditioning units, whatever it took to process these people. Frankly, we failed at Al Udeid.
Where do you think that failure came from? Do you think it was the State Department? Do you think
I think it was Air Force leadership. 100% Air Force leadership, specifically the base commander. I'm going to put it on the base commander, a general officer. There's I think a principle of leadership that I would call understand your AOR. Understand your area of responsibility. Is a 1-star general at Al Udeid Air Base ever going to win a fight with the State Department? No. The military's not going to win a fight with the State Department. Quit fighting that battle. Now, what can you do? All right, we have 12,000 people coming into the space a day, less than 1,000 leaving. How do we solve this problem? They never did that. That was never addressed. I heard, well, we don't have enough air conditioning units. We don't have enough bus drivers. We ran out of fuel trucks. It got to the point where we would try to leave to go to Kabul, and it would take us 2 hours. Every takeoff was delayed 2 hours. Every single one because we didn't have enough fuel trucks. Well, if every C-17 in America was over in the Middle East flying in this, what are all the fuel trucks and the fuel truck drivers doing at home? Get them over there. Fly them over on a C-17. Let's do it. Let's get the logistic might of the United States of America involved in this, and we never did.
And the thing, I'll give credit, or at least they say, hey, you know what? Sometimes, there's always, you're competing for resources and there's limited resources. But in this scenario, in this event, there was nothing more of focus for the entire United States and the world at that time period. So I feel like if you asked and said, I need X, Y, and Z in order to make this happen, X, Y, and Z would have shown up. The might of the United States,
without a doubt,
would have supported whatever was needed to make the mission happen in this case. Because
without a doubt.
So
I don't know if it was the commander thought, hey, if I have to ask for these things, it's an indication that I'm failing. If I ask for help, that shows that I can't do it. I don't know if it was that type of bad decision making, or if it was, an oversight. I hope not at that level, that you wouldn't have that type of oversight, or just a misunderstanding of what was in the realm of possibility. So I suggested this is to the deputy base commander, the vice commander. Hey, I'm from Charleston. I call my wing commander right now. You know what we need over here? I said, we need crew buses and we need drivers. They will bring all of them from Charleston because I know, because we were empty here. Charleston was empty. We had sent everybody forward. And he said, there's no way they're going to fly a bus over here from Charleston. And I said, what? Yes, we will. What do you mean? No, there's no way. Yes, we will. You know, someone,
out of curiosity, base commander was pilot background or so then again, to give credit, like no one has ever dealt with an influx of 120,000 refugees, probably in the United States Air Force and ever. So there's definitely gonna be a lot of learning curves, but it's one of those things that you're encouraged, right? Thinking outside the box. Like, I mean, it's like basic, you know, when you do like your second lieutenant ASBC and then SOS, like here's a problem and you don't have all the tools to do it. How do you think outside the box? So to speak,
you know what he needed to do
to make it happen?
I would like to have seen him do that he never did. And I also suggested this. I mean, I'm talking like directly to the leadership team. It's one of the things that was most frustrating. I said, he needs to get on a C-17 and fly one of these missions with us. Get on, come with me. I will fly you to Kabul and back, and you can experience exactly what's happening and give you some perspective on maybe where you need to focus some of your efforts. Never did. And not to say, I'm not discounting at all the enormity of the challenge that they had. They did have to process 100,000 evacuees from Afghanistan and try to somehow identify if any of them were terrorists. I mean, that's really, really hard thing to do. These people don't show up with any, there's no ID, they don't have IDs on them, nothing. They literally have the clothes on their back. And so it is an enormous problem. I'm not discounting that at all. However, we're the United States of America. We should not have logistics problems.
Yeah, and that's what I guess is the thing is, if I was in that position, like I wouldn't, like, all right, hey, I've never dealt with 100,000 people and processing them. But if my pilots can't get off the plane for 6 hours, or there's not enough buses or fuel trucks, that is the comfort zone and falling back to your circle. Like, okay, I can solve those problems and I'll do whatever it takes to solve those problems. At least that's how I would. And then like, all right, 100%. Figure everything else as you go. So it's frustrating to hear that.
Yeah, 100%. And we're now like halfway through it. We did put together, it did get pretty routine at some point. Never easy. This was always the backlog at the deed was the worst. It was horrible. I mean, everybody, one of the great things I saw was every person at IUD lifting a hand to do something. So I was living with the tanker pilot, the tanker squadron, KC-135 tanker squadron. And they weren't employed. They were flying a couple of lines a day. And their commander, great guy, he asked for volunteers from his unit, but they all volunteered to go build tents. KC-135 aircrew squadron out building tents for evacuees. I saw Army guys doing the same thing. It was fantastic to watch just everybody. How can we get involved in helping some way? That part was pretty fantastic. So I mentioned a minute ago that we're dealing with that at the D. The calmest place was Kabul. Let me tell you how Kabul got that way. I watched this happen with my own eyes as well. How do you get thousands and thousands and thousands of people to clear the runway? Right? They're not listening to helicopters and flashbangs and Army guys with rifles. They're just straight ignoring everybody. We're not going to resort to violence. We don't do that. United States of America, we don't do that. We didn't have a riot police out there. We enlisted the help of the Taliban. And this is how they clear. I watched them clear the runway. Came out with their Taliban white robes, so easily identifiable. And they had these 6-foot sticks, like staffs, like huge, thick staffs. And I just watched them beat people with these sticks and heard them, right? They came out in a skirmish line, like a riot police, except their terrifying white robes, and just kept pushing people and beating them with these sticks until they finally cleared them. And then the Taliban, we had, we were communicating with them. We had aligned interests, certainly not working with them. I would never say that. But aligned interest. They wanted us gone and we wanted to be gone. And so in this mutual interest, they helped maintain. They had an outer perimeter. We had the inner perimeter. That was it. That was how we got that runway clear. We never It'd still be crawling with people right now if it wasn't for something like that. I don't really
That is insane.
know how I feel about that either.
You know,
I don't know how I feel about that either because I mean, I don't know. It was horrible to watch. Yeah, man, tough.
The struggle I had, I mean, dude, I'm watching this from 8,000 miles away, right? But I remember listening to one briefing from a 4-star talking about cooperating with the Taliban. And, you know, it's like every grain of your being, like the whole reason. My first flight, September 10th, 2001, right? Like that was a catalyst the next day for me to go join and serve. And you want to get back at the people who did all this. The Taliban facilitated the environment for that to grow. And then all you want to do is get into the fight and make it right. And then fast forward 20 years later, like as you mentioned, there are aligned interests of we want to leave and they want us to leave. Yeah. I think a lot of people struggle with that. I know I'm like,
I do too. I mean, you know, we see them out there. We
you're and like you also know what's happening now to.
Oh yeah, and we knew it then too. I mean, you know what? We started getting word that we basically said if you have any documentation that shows anything about the United States, I don't know, like the whole thing. Like, how did you get through the lines of the U.S.? You had to prove something, right? We weren't just letting anybody through there. But I've heard even people with proper documentation couldn't get through that Taliban perimeter, right? They had to get through them first, and then that really like became a challenge for them. And I did. I walked through. So we get through about halfway through this evacuation, and we start thinking about the end game, right? Okay, how are we going to leave? Like the final things, like how are we going to leave?
Yeah,
and we started talking about something called a JTE, a Joint Tactical Exfil, and this is essentially it's a way to collapse a perimeter safely and quickly. Basically, it's like a reverse sneak attack. Essentially, like we got these army guys on the walls, right, doing perimeter security. Right. They're watching all of our backs while we're flying airplanes. Who's watching their backs?
They have to get on the plane. Because correct me if I'm wrong, Bagram, it was like pop ninja smoke middle of the night, like because it made the news that the ANA, the Afghans, didn't know we were leaving. Yeah. And I'm sure maybe I don't know, but it was just like, hey, one day they're there, and then it's that type of exit where, hey, we're going.
I read a news article. It's pretty great. It's basically like we left and we made a phone call to the ANA commander and said, hey, by the way, we're gone. The keys are under the mat. Good luck.
I mean, that's right. I mean, is that how it actually went? I mean, roughly went down like, dude, we're out of here. Like, I'll see you tomorrow morning for coffee, and then never show up.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like the Bagram one was effective too because they didn't know. Nobody knew. You know, we didn't tell them. The problem with Kabul is we told them exactly what was happening. This was like the source of the chaos. Okay? This was the poor political decision that led to that. All of this, that created all of the chaos and all of the pressure in Kabul was telling them when we were leaving. We know this as military guys. We'll tell the bad guys what your plan is. One of the most frustrating days for me was we landed after one of these missions. You know, all the normal frustrations that I just talked about. It's horrible. It's 2:00 in the morning. We're in the chow hall with the crew, you know, having midnight breakfast or whatever it is. And the news is on TV in the chow hall, the Al Jazeera station, and it's a Taliban spokesman. And it's probably like around the 20th of August or something like that, or maybe later. And we'd said August 31st, but it's not looking good for us. Like, there's still a ton of people that we have to get out, and you just do the math. Like, all right, we're putting 450 people on board. How many C-17s do we have enough? Can we do it? And it's not looking good. And the Taliban spokesman says August 31st is a line in the sand. The United States of America will be gone by August 31st. And I remember like looking at my crew and saying, the Taliban terrorists do not tell the United States of America what to do. I better wake up in the morning and see my president on TV telling that guy to go back to his cave. We'll be done when we're done. And actually, if you ask me, a very politically easy answer to this. And the answer is, the president comes on TV and he says, hey, I'll be clear here. August 31st is our goal. We do want to be gone by August 31st. But make no mistake, we will be here until we're finished. Don't start shit with us, Taliban. Don't start stuff up again that you know you can't finish. You've been hiding for 20 years because you did that last time. Leave us alone. You know what I mean?
Yeah, simple.
No, instead,
very simple.
I did see the president come on TV the next day. And he said, we agree. America will be gone by August 31st. It was horrible. And what that message to us who were there was, oh, not only is this not going to get any better, it's probably going to get worse. This problem's probably going to get worse. Not only have we told the enemy that we're leaving, what our plans are exactly, but we've also messaged to the population that there's an end date, and if you don't get on an airplane by then, you know, tough luck. So what do you think that did to them? What do you think that did to the population? It made it crazy.
Just induced the panic even more, yeah.
Yeah, and then, you know, on August 26th was the worst day. Well, before I get to that, I'll tell you, around this time we started planning for this JT, Joint Tactical Expo. How are we gonna get everybody, Americans, out of there? Right? We're done with the evacuation, and now we need to evacuate all of the Americans, the military, the troops safely, because eventually we have to abandon our guard towers and turn it over to the Taliban. And we don't, I know we're cooperating with them, but we don't trust them. And ISIS is there. So that's what the whole point of the Joint Tactical Expo was. And that's what I was named mission commander of. I was named the Air Mission Commander, so the commander of the Air Forces, as part of this Joint Tactical Expo. The Ground Force Commander was the 82nd Airborne Division Commander, Major General Donoghue. Also phenomenal man, warrior leader. Love that guy. So I spent a lot of time, I would fly these missions with my crews, and then the next day, crew gets a day off. I would just jump on a C-17 and fly up there and do planning with the Army. And so as opposed to being a pilot where you land and you spend all the time in the military ramp doing your loading procedures and you take off, I would land, get off C-17, jump in a vehicle, go inside the Kabul gate where we're doing the planning, meet up with the Army guys there, and then the end of the day or whenever we're done planning, try to catch a ride home. So one of the things that struck me as walking through there is what the base looked like. And it had become a refugee city. So even for the people that we had vetted who had made it in, right, they made it, we were going to let them go, get on a C-17, come home. They still had to wait somewhere to actually get on the C-17. So this entire base looked like the largest homeless city you've ever seen. It was families literally laying on cardboard boxes on the sidewalk. Like, I'm walking down the street to get to the planning facility, and I'm, you know, dodging and weaving all these. They look like homeless families, you know, waiting to get out of there. Man, it was crazy. And then just outside the gate was still the chaos and the hysteria going on of all the people trying to get out, desperate to get out. And that's sort of what led to the August 26th incident, where we had thousands of people crowded into the gate, known as the Abbey Gate, on the road there. And that was when the ISIS terrorist, we now know is ISIS, detonated a suicide vest. And in that super tight, crowded area, 200 Afghans were killed. 13 Americans were killed that day, and then obviously hundreds more wounded. That to me was by far the worst day. We were 4 days from being finished, from being out of Afghanistan, hopefully forever. And we had that tragedy occur, and that was tough. That was a tough day for everybody. And I don't want to say, I'm not going to second guess whether it could have been preventable or not. We're dealing with ISIS terrorists, you know, have to use logic and common sense and stuff like that, but it certainly wasn't helped that we had that massive thing. I wonder if we didn't have an end date, you know, if we could have, I don't know.
You definitely induce chaos when you draw a line in the sand and agree upon it, and the populace, everyone's trying to get out of there and they're worried about what's going to happen. You induce more chaos, I think. Carl Miller, good buddy of mine, he was C-17, Bubba, and then T-6s, then Cessna 206s. I had him on the podcast last year. He was en route to go do go to school in DC when this kind of all started. And then he's using social media and WhatsApp to kind of build the network and get people out of Afghanistan. Like there were several veteran groups that kind of did that, like ad hoc. Yeah. And one of the stories he tells is it's an Afghan Air Force colonel who is up in Mazar Sharif up in the north and makes his way down to Kabul. And it's in the chaos. I think it's like the 25th. And he's talking to this Afghan colonel on the phone. And somehow this Afghan convinces one of these young Marines. And to this day, Carl's like, I don't know if he was one that was killed in this attack or not. But this Afghan, if you imagine, in my mind, you got these just mass hysteria. And he convinces this Marine to take his phone. And Carl talks to him like, hey, you don't know who I am, but, I'm Lieutenant Colonel so-and-so. You don't owe me anything. But this gentleman that just handed you the phone, like he has done great things for our nation and our security. And as a friend, if you'd help him get through. Right. Because as you mentioned before, like, all right, the Taliban's now in the mix. They're not letting people through. He sent me a picture, and I don't think it wasn't this particular individual, but another person he was helping. Wheelbarrow in his yard, burning all of his flight records, anything that had any association to the United States. So for those listening or watching, just like putting yourself in that chaotic scenario where one, like just trying to get from point A to point B, and then that point B is getting to the gate, and then trying to get yourself through that gate, through the Taliban, through the vetting process of the United States, and you've had to burn everything or leave everything behind. It's wild. It's unimaginable for me to think.
I had an opportunity not long ago to meet an Afghan woman who made it out, and her story is pretty remarkable too. She was air traffic control. She actually worked in the tower at Kabul International Airport. Speaks English very well, and she was faced with it when the Taliban hit the city of Kabul. They cut everybody off. They basically surrounded the airport right away. They knew, right? They wanted to hold accountable the people who were supporting Americans. So they cut off all access to it until we started coordinating. And so she was trapped inside the perimeter. And so she was convinced by some folks she worked with to come across the runway, get on a C-17 and get out of there. But in her story, she said she was hiding for 2 days inside the tower from the Taliban as they were searching. She never got to see her family again. Could not make it back home. Her family was on the other side of the line of Taliban. And she was trapped on the inside. And other than talking to her mom on the phone, and to this day has never seen her mom yet. Some of the things that these people were doing, real crazy. I mean, it was hard for us, but in most cases, it wasn't life and death like that. I mean, it's pretty nuts scenario, and I give a lot of credit to the U.S. organizations that are still involved with it to get people out. There's essentially like an underground railroad going on. I met a guy. I gave a talk at Tufts University up in Boston, and I met a young Afghani there who was in grad school, and he had family over there, and he was worried because he was in school in America, and if the Taliban found out, he was able to coordinate with one of these U.S. agencies to smuggle his family out through Pakistan on the ground. They did not get out on the flight, but thankfully they were able to get out another way. And that's still going on. There's still people trying to get out of that. And we left behind a lot of people. We didn't leave behind any Americans. Like, I'll put that to bed right now. We didn't leave behind any Americans. I know this for a fact. Many Americans stayed, but we did not leave them. And when we say Americans, what we're really talking about is Afghan Americans. And these are people who were given the opportunity to leave, but chose not to abandon their families. And many of them lived in remote places of Afghanistan, like not in. So I don't think, to my knowledge, and I was knowledgeable of this, we didn't leave any Americans. There were some there that chose to stay. But we left many Afghans behind who should have got out. Because we had an arbitrary date of August 31st of getting out. That's why. The only reason.
Yep. The suicide bomb, when that went off, what did that change? Did it? obviously it had to impact operations. It obviously probably ramped up the stress level. What changed with the environment then?
Yeah, I think just the stress level probably. Nothing from the operation because it had happened outside the gate, at the gate essentially. So hearing it, seeing the smoke, and C-17s were obviously involved in evacuating all the wounded and unfortunately the 13 Americans that were killed. When something like that happens, our medevac mission, C-17s do a medevac mission. That becomes the number one priority. Whatever you got going on, you kick everything off your airplane, and that becomes your priority. And so that happened immediately to anybody who was there, essentially any C-17 that was there. In addition to flying in some additional medical care, but it didn't change anything going on with the evacuation, C-17 evacuation operation, other than maybe pretty stark reminder of the seriousness of the business. Our intel obviously got pretty heavily involved there. We started looking and finding and talking more with the Taliban. There was a pretty negative thing that came out of that, if you remember. We started, I don't want to say started, I'm sure we were doing it before, but we developed some intel that there was another potential ISIS bomb maker or suicide attack coming. And we developed this intel. We tracked it and tracked it and tracked it for a while. I eventually got to the point where the decision makers felt confident enough in their intel, and we launched a hellfire at this vehicle. And it turned out to not be a terrorist. Matter of fact, it was a father and a bunch of his kids. That made the news. This was.
Yep.
I hate to say that more negativity came out of that, but that was probably a little bit of heightened, we just had been attacked. Now we're a little more on edge, and it seems like we made a mistake, pretty big mistake.
Yeah.
For me, the worst part was I think that one of my personal difficult experiences the very next day after the bombing. I'm in Kabul. I was in Kabul on the day of the bombing, flying, and I'm in Kabul the very next day doing the planning for the JTE. And I'm in the planning cell, and Intel breaks that there's 2 potential suicide bombers have made it over the fence, snuck their way in. Either they saw them or they're picked up on camera or something. These guys are now inside the perimeter. And so it's essentially a bolo, right? For the entire base to find these people. And some hours go by, and it's time for me to leave. And so I just, the way, when I was up there for planning days, the way that I would get home back to IUD was I just literally walk out on the ramp, buddy of mine would drive me out there, and I'd knock on the door of C-17. Hey, where are you guys going? Are you going to the deed? All right, I'm coming with you. I need a ride. And so I do this. I jump on board, and we're, we just loaded everybody. And then I get the call that they've located the 2 unknown actors. And they're on this airplane. They're on my airplane. And so that was a pretty tense situation. So we're not going to take off now. We're going to download these people, and we're going to search them while we bring some army guys out. We start the process of downloading these passengers, and I just have this thought. I'm like, well, if the guy's here, he's going to know the jig is up. He's not going to be like, oh, you got me. He's going to push the button any second. I'm standing there amidst all these people, and I'm like, this, any second, And I was coherent enough in my thinking to think of my family. So I pulled out my cell phone and texted them what I thought could be, the last text I ever sent them. I didn't want to freak them out and say anything. I don't want to freak them out. So I just said, hey guys, we have a family group chat. I just texted the group chat. I said, hey guys, I love you so much, and then put my phone away, and then just waited. And so we found the guys and got them off. Got them off the airplane. They weren't suicide bombers, obviously. I'm right here. So, it worked out. It worked out just fine. But yeah, then spent like the next 3 hours on that flight being like, "Well, we found the right guys," you know. Like, that was like the longest 3 hour flight of my life, and it's just thinking about like, I did a lot of praying on that, like a lot of you just like think about like everything, like, all right, it's completely out of my control. There's like nothing I can do with it. It's either going to happen or it's not, and so let's not worry about it. So I wasn't worried about it, but it makes you think about like a lot of interesting things,
Yeah.
And then that was over. Then went to bed, and like 2 days later, we launched the final mission to go in there. The final mission was great. It was like, I love stuff like that. It's what we train for. It's like what my job really was. It was great being part of the evacuation. My team went in and out of Kabul more than any other C-17 pilots, period. We flew more missions than anybody else because we had additional duties that we were doing as part of this whole two stuff that was happening. And then even when I wasn't flying, the fact that I was up there all the time was we spent a lot of time like involved from the very beginning to the very end. Like, our team was a great perspective, I think, a unique perspective relative to a lot of the folks who were there to be able to see it through from beginning to end. And the final mission was great. It was a 5-ship of C-17s, and we flew in one formation, sort of like a reverse sneak attack. We come in there, landing one after another rapidly. Lights out. They turn off the lights of the runway, and we pre-plan this. We all go to a different place. We land and immediately taxi to a different place on the airfield, to where the Army is sort of gathering their troops. At a given signal, once we land, they sort of collapse their perimeters and into a rally point. And from those rally points, we load the C-17s and get out. That's sort of the gist. I didn't go that smoothly, obviously. And in addition to us, the 5 C-17s that were the primary mission, I brought 3 C-17s with me as backup. Each one of them had different roles. I had an empty C-17 just in case I needed more cargo space for one reason or another, or somebody broke. I mean, if a C-17 broke, we were going to abandon it. We had plans actually to drop a bomb on a C-17 if we had to leave it behind.
I was going to ask, if one got stuck there, were you going to destroy it?
Yeah. I mean, the Air Force guys, you imagine planning this thing. So we're in the MPC, the mission planning cell, at the KOC at IUD, right? And this is going on like every day. I'm like flying up to Kabul, and then like I come back, I do some planning with the 82nd, then I come back to the mission planning cell and update all the Air Force guys. That was not the smoothest process ever. This is easier for me to plan with the Army guys than it was the Air Force guys. We had like 20 jets involved in this, right? We had a huge fighter presence overhead. We had a lot of unmanned, ISR in the area, of course, which was the thing that I cared most about, was ISR. But you just never knew. So it was an impressive stack. We don't get a chance to put that into play very often too. But 20 aircraft, and I think we even had the Navy got involved, maybe with a couple of F-18s. Based on the longevity of the mission, holding times, and not having tankers available, for everybody. So it wasn't a ton of time in the air for the fighter community, but F-15s, F-16s, UAVs, AC-130s, it was awesome. It was awesome final mission for everybody.
I meant to ask, who was controlling the airfield? Was this a tactical air control?
Yeah, at that point. So yeah, prior to that, it was the CRW, Air Force CRW, Contingency Response Wing. Hang on just a sec. Yeah, so the airfield up until the final mission was being run by the CRW, Contingency Response Wing. That's sort of their job. They got folks who control towers, that kind of thing. But for the final mission, we brought the CRW out and we left it in the hands of JTAC. Special Air Force special ops guys who do that. They run the airfield essentially from the ground, and they're the last people to leave. We work with those guys a lot, so really, really good working relationship. And the JTE, we practice it enough as well that a relatively smooth operation. I mean, nothing's perfect, but we knew our business. It worked really, really well. That type of planning worked really well. I mean, and the planning is like very, very intense planning. It's the level of detail we put in there is amazing, and obviously that's so that it'll go off as well as it did. We had a lot of worries worries, concerns going in there. Some of the challenges were Kabul sits in a bowl. It's surrounded by mountains on three sides. So there's really only one way in and one way out. You can take off on the opposite runway, but it's such a steep climb that it really limits how much weight you can put on a C-17. So we were mostly confined to one way in, one way out. So we were concerned a little bit with the weather. Another reason I had extra C-17s on standby in case the wind shift and we can't take off the way we want. Bring in some other C-17s to help carry the load. And then
did those other C-17s land, or did you have them?
Yeah, I just had them holding it in a stack on standby. So one had a CCAT team on it, the medical team. In case something really bad happened, fly on the medical team, evac people that way. One of them had a whole bunch of spare parts in it, a risk kit we call it. So just a ton of C-17 spare parts, like our maintenance jet, with some maintenance folks on board. And then the third one was just completely empty. So basically, I had a little menu to choose from based on what I needed. My job as the Air Mission Commander was sort of to run all that. Obviously I did a lot of delegating. Like there's an AWACS controlling actually the sky. The sky stack is being run by an AWACS, of course, as it should be. And so I rarely even got on that frequency. So they're monitoring me. We had worked this out ahead of time, and we had set some conditions with the fighters. Like, this is all I cared about. Here's the airspace I need. I need all this maneuvering space over here. I'm not going to go above this altitude. So just as long as you guys don't go below this altitude, I think we'll have no problem. Yes. Do whatever you want up there. Do whatever you want. Whatever you feel like you need to do. As long as you don't impede the mission. But one of the challenges we had in the planning phase, it was unfortunate with the Air Force. Like the Army gets it. You heard the term, some of the listeners may have heard supporting forces versus supported forces. So the supported force in this case was the Army, right? We are getting them out. So it's based on how do we collapse this airfield? They are the supported. C-17s are supporting. However, when it came to the air picture, the C-17s were the supported force. Everybody else existed so that the C-17s could get in and out of there safely. So we had, part of the fighter job was, it is an international airport. It is international airspace. Theoretically, some other aircraft could have entered the airspace. And so they're going to do an intercept mission to get them out of this part. Basically, it's like, we are keeping this airspace clear for the C-17s. What they're doing. And then we had eyes on everything. Like we worked with a lot, and if I have one aircraft overhead in addition, I would have chosen an AC-130 gunship. They have an awesome ability to see a lot of things. They have great, cameras that can look everywhere, and they've got a variety of munitions, to help us out if ISIS decided to make a one last stand, or if the Taliban. We felt pretty good that the Taliban commanders were going to support us. But I don't know about the rest of the forces, if somebody was going to try some sort of parting shot. And so we were watching them pretty closely as well. But yeah, it was, when you get, two different Army organizations, plus C-17s, plus things like AC-130s, plus UAVs, plus fighters, then that's a lot of people in one room, one planning room. And you can that stuff. At one point, there's a lack of understanding, I think, in the Air Force about how these operations work. So I think the Air Force thinks a lot in terms of JFE, Joint Forcible Entry. Like, we're going to go in and dominate the airspace. And this is an Air Force mission. Nobody can come in until the Air Force does its job. Well, this is the opposite of that. We already own all the airspace.
That's a good point.
So we're doing the exact opposite. And we had a really hard time getting through that. At one point, somebody in the room, a major F-15 guy, suggested that the AWACS be the Air Mission Commander. And it was such an inane comment that I just ignored it. I was like, I can't, man, I do not even have the time to engage in how dumb that comment is. For your listeners, here's why I'll say this is the thing. Here's why I'm the Air Mission Commander. How many people can a C-17 hold on board? How much you weigh?
I have no idea.
Right? What type of aircraft performance? What if a C-17 breaks? How long can you hold for? You know this in a JFE, we set the timing. This is what time we're going to get in there. We all know what time the time is. In a JTE, it's the opposite. My job as C-17 guy is to show up, and I'm going to get called in, and I'm going to get called in maybe one at a time, and so I'm going to get asked by the JTAC. They state your earliest ETA, latest ETA, max hold times. I mean, we're doing like math in the cockpit to like work this out amongst the fights. Right. There is no scenario where a non-C-17 person is the air mission commander in this type of operation. But just that understanding didn't exist. I mean, it's a pretty rare operation, so we don't practice a lot with that.
Well, I was saying, probably the only time like a red flag, when you mix in a C-17 and a red flag, it's usually, hey, they got some airdrop mission that's going to be happening concurrently, but the main mission, the main objective for this is something else. So it is that mindset. But, inherently, I agree with you. Like the Air Force just in general has a problem understanding it from like the basic, from basic finance and comm and things like that, like who's supported, what's the prior mission set. I think, being a Block 50 seed guy, Wild Weasel mission, and doing escort, like realize like, all right, yeah, you might be in a pointy nose jet, but you're there so other people can do the mission and get to the objective, right? Like you're supporting whatever that might be.
Right.
And so
that makes more sense to me from your mission set too, but it's, it'd be hard to be an air to air, or just a transition from a JFE, which we practice often enough, to a JTE, which we practice never. With that. I mean, I practice JTEs all the time because that's really an Army led thing. We're familiar with it. C-130s are very familiar with it. But yeah, so it just, I mean, not a huge deal. It was just a headache for me to walk into the MPC every day and be like, the first time I sat down and they're like, all right, here's your times. Here's your entry and exit times. And I freaking tore that piece of paper up and I said, guys, that's not how this works. Here's what's going to happen. I have this airspace. I'm going to show up at this time because that's when I said I'm going to be there. And I'm going to wait as long as it takes for them, because the word go actually happens from the ground up, right? There, you imagine this enormous checklist they're running on the ground. They're not going to collapse things one at a time. It's not like, okay, that tower's ready to go, they can go. It's everybody all at once. And so everybody is doing their part of this mission on the ground, and there's going to be delays. And the thing that scares us the most is leaving somebody behind. You got hundreds of Army guys. It's pitch black night. Everybody's on night vision goggles. It is accountability is one of the most significant things. We actually practiced it. We even practiced this the loading and accountability process before. We practiced this in Kabul. We sent a C-17 up to Kabul. It obviously didn't tell anybody, kind of put it over in a hangar so nobody could see what was going on. And we practiced loading it. We just used one C-17 to sort of mimic the 5. That's how important like that role is. And so that's what's going on the ground in the Army. It is a complicated thing to make sure that everybody's go. And then when they say go, it is the C-17s are like bam, 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 all 5, like landing, like immediately going to your spots, keeping the engines running, loading them all up, and then doing our thing, and then dealing with whatever contingencies arise. We left the cell phone behind, just cell phone, in case somebody got left behind.
No kidding. That's something as simple as that. And I go you're saying like accountability. I mean, it's probably down to like lining up and, platoon leaders going through, making sure all they're got and doing it.
That's right. I don't really know exactly how they all do it, but I watched them do it enough, and I'm just waiting for the call from the one guy. And then, and my job as Air Mission Commander too is, I'm running the air picture, and I'm communicating directly with the GFC, the Ground Force Commander, so General Donoghue. So him and I had talked many times in the plan leading up to it. As a matter of fact, we did have some contingencies going in there. The JT while I was en route to Kabul. The only time I've ever taken a phone call on a C-17, we outfit it with some roll-on, roll-off communications equipment for these types of missions. And I'm up in the cockpit, and one of the Army guys comes up to me. He's like, hey, sir, General Donoghue needs to talk to you. So I go downstairs, and I literally pick up a telephone, a zipper phone. There's General Donoghue on the other side, and A couple things he wanted to just tweak a couple things with the mission, which ended up not being a big deal. We were totally able to support, which is cool. But that's it. And then we land, and I'm in direct comms with JTAC, and who's got the GFC right with him. And then the GFC is on board my aircraft. And as soon as he gets on board, they tear down their comms. Now the only comms that exist on the airfield are through me to each C-17. And I have General Donoghue standing right next to me, sort of giving the word go, right? And sort of the orchestrated version of this is just like all the Army guys wait until everybody's ready to go to hit go, and then they do their thing. Same thing with the C-17s. Somebody, C-17 number 2 is full and ready to go. Doesn't matter. They sit there with their doors and ramps open, still waiting for the go call from me, in case for some reason we need to rapidly redeploy the force. Right? We don't want something happens. The enemy comes over the fence. Goes kinetic. We don't want to have to wait to open doors to get the Army out. They stay ready to fight until we get airborne. And so this call I'm waiting for from him. So the unique radio calls I got to make there was clamshell. That's our code word for C-17s. I'll close up. I give that. And then, if you're looking at a God's eye view, once I give the clamshell clear to taxi, again, it's orchestrated. We know who 1 is, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we're all coming from different parts of the airfield. We all convene together in this nice little dance, line up, and then go take off. And at one point, we got word from one of the ISR assets that there were Taliban inside the perimeter. And it's true, there were. We couldn't see them. We couldn't get eyes on them. They told us about where they were. So I called up C-17 number 1. Awesome pilot, weapons officer. I called her up and said, hey, I need you can you see anything? They're apparently close to you. She said she couldn't. So I had her take the runway, which basically made her do a 180 so she could do a big scan. And she located them. There was about 10 Taliban guys. They weren't doing anything wrong. They just were standing there watching our operation like in progress, which is a little disconcerting too. But looked like they weren't going to do anything. So we then go to leave, and I'm jet number 5, the last one, and I remember taxiing by these guys and all their white robes, and they're waving at us as we're leaving. But you could just sense it, just like knew this wasn't like a friendly "see you later" wave. If they knew what the middle finger was, that's what they were doing. They were saying, wow. So long. We win. Get out of here. Yeah, that's right. BFY. Yeah, I just felt that watching those guys, man.
That's eerie. Because I'm envisioning as the Army, they're hitting their trigger points and their signals and they're falling back. I mean, they had the perimeter secured, right? Now they evacuate the towers, they evacuate the checkpoints, yada yada. They're falling back, but the Taliban's just right outside.
They are, yeah. There's no way. I mean, there's key moments in this when you do something like this, certainly where there's going to be moments of vulnerability. You know what I mean? Still C-17, still Army guys. We're still taking off. I mean,
how long were you guys on the ground? Can you say?
I can't say.
Yeah. Did you practice this? Because I'm even thinking it's something that's basic, like walking through. If you're going to different parts of the airfield, whether it's like on a magnetic board with little toy C-17s, or you're walking through. But it's something you take for granted. Having taxi lights, having a lit airfield, and if you're doing this at night, knowing, I mean, is it just, hey, we're going to brief it? Or are you going to walk it out? Or
No, we do. We practice. We rehearse it. It gets rehearsed.
Yeah.
Very, very in detail planning by all of us. The pilots do before we take off. This is really important when you have dissimilar aircraft too. You have, we do a lot of stuff with C-130s, KC-135s. They do like a what if drill. We sit down, the pilots all sit down together. What if this happens? What if this happens? What if this? And you're going to cover everything. But you're going to cover a lot of stuff. And then if something else happens that you haven't covered, you probably covered something like it. So it's just a way to build contingency plans, essentially. So without getting into like too much of the detail of the classified stuff we do, I'll just say it's very, very well rehearsed, including how to taxi, where to park with no lights, and that kind of stuff. There's some, crafty little tools that we've all developed over the years that make it pretty effective. to the point where that stuff kind of becomes pretty routine. But it is unique. Like, this isn't even like dealing with the special operations stuff. This is normal stuff. Landing on an airfield when it's dark, and this could be anywhere in the world, and you're always like, is that our parking spot? Is this where we go? Is that the right taxiway? Like, are we in the right spot? Yes, absolutely. That's an issue. But the way that we practice it is funny. Is we walk it as if you're in an airplane. Like, you'll walk it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a sheriff line back in pilot training, like you walk a pattern, and we do the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Tape it on the ground. And that's why I was kind of getting at, is like, for those listening, just, this is a super complex mission that you're doing, but it's even the basic stuff that you take for granted, like being able to see with having your taxi light on, or having the lights on in the cockpit and being able to see like that. You can't do that here. Yeah. And apples and oranges here, right? But doing demo, and you'd fly a heritage flight with a Mustang or a P-47, you would, no kidding, even though you did this 1,000 times, you and the other pilot beforehand would usually stand outside, and you would walk around doing position changes and things like that, just to kind of get your mind right. So
that matters. That's the practice, the rehearsing stuff, man. I don't care what you're doing, flying or not flying, any job that. Man, sports teams do it all the time. Tiger Woods had a swing coach. You know what I mean? Like, practice never ends. Yeah.
Yep. Doesn't matter where you are.
Yeah.
You did say earlier on you had an anecdotal story for August 31st. You want to share that?
Yeah, the final mission. Yeah, it was this part. It was about the Taliban. They're waving to us. Just moments that I'll never forget. This probably 5-minute stretch, like, I'll never forget. Okay? Pictured in my mind right now. I'm the 5th jet, so we're taxiing out, and we take off on real short interval takeoffs, and taxied by the Taliban guys waving at us, which is weird. And then I take the runway, and I realize in the moment that this is it. That Afghanistan's like over. I relieve it. Like, I graduated the academy in 2001. 9/11 happened 3 months later, and my entire career, like all of us. Entire career was spent over there, and like, this is it. Like, it was really cool to realize, like, in the moment, like, this is the last jet to leave Afghanistan. And so I take the runway, and on night vision goggles, as soon as we start rolling, I just have this picture. I can see all 5 jets. The Taliban's behind us now, and jet number 1 it's a takeoff and an immediate left turn. And I see number 1 has made the left turn. 2 is in the left turn. 3 is just lifted off. 4 is at the end of the runway about to take off, and I'm 5. I just see our entire train of C-17s leaving, like that image right there, like frozen in time forever for me. And then the final radio call. We had a point of no return essentially built into the plan, right? Every aircraft was going to hit this point. And if they didn't hear from me proceed, they actually were going to make another left turn and head back to the airfield. Because of the terrain, and once you pass that point, it was going to be really tough. So, let's say jet number 4 has to reject a takeoff for some reason, gets trapped on the runway, maintenance or worse. And for some reason we need to redeploy the force. Well, I need the shooters that are on the other jets in front of there. So everybody's actually takeoff plan was, I'm going to take off and I'm going right back to the runway, unless, right? Very different from like, I'm not going back unless, like, it was, I am going back to the runway unless I'm told we're all good. So once I got airborne, told everybody to proceed. And then as soon as I hit that point, I made a radio call. The call was just MAF safe. I pushed this out over all nets. So everybody hears it, like, that's it. MAF for Mobility Air Forces. MAF safe was the code word for, like, that's it. And I heard later that there was a lot of people. I talked to SecDef, Secretary Austin, and he said that he was watching, and he heard that radio. He said, this is what he told me. He said, I was watching you guys leave, and I was on the phone with the president when I heard you make that. So that was pretty awesome.
Jeez. That's wild. Here's a question, pilot question. If a C-17, could you have taken it off 3 engines? Like if you lost a motor on the field?
Yes, but not without us to get no cargo, essentially, no weight. We
Okay.
practiced that
So you
scenario. We actually flew that scenario in a sim back home. I was forward at IUD, but we had some people back at Charleston get in a simulator and take off from Kabul in the sim, 3 engines. What's it going to take? What are the weather factors that would allow us to do it, and how much weight can you have on board? And we essentially figured out no weight at all. And with gas too. I mean, taking off with min fuel, right? Min fuel to us means you got to land immediately. Like you don't have time to do anything else. You got to land. We were taking off with min fuel, so it also meant hitting a tanker. Right? Like it was going to be really difficult if that happened. Almost, I think that would have been a real-time decision for me to abandon the C-17 or to go, see if we could do it. So maybe we either hit a tanker. I mean, none of us have ever air refueled with 3 engines, but I trust in our abilities, our pilots' abilities to do stuff like that. Or maybe we just go land in Pakistan, take off and hit Pakistan right away. For an emergency, and go land there. So we did have some contingency planning. I think my sense is the leadership would have preferred us to leave the C-17 behind and leave it there. Drop a bomb on it or something. Nothing would have been worse though politically. The Taliban posing in front of a C-17. I mean, C-17 just screams America.
Yep.
So thankfully that didn't happen. I've told this story a couple times now, and now that I'm retired, I'll update everybody. Day before the mission, we're done planning, man. We're done. We do our final briefs. Like you know how these big operations go. There's one massive crew brief. That was a really cool moment. It's in a big theater. It's in a theater, the ops group commander's theater, and I walk. All my crews are in there. It's packed. And I walk out on stage for the briefing, and I just have this moment. I felt like I was watching a World War II movie, when all the bomber pilots get ready to take off from England, and it was really cool. As we're doing that, we're about to take off and go fly to a different country, and that was a neat moment. So we do the briefing, and then each aircraft, each crew breaks up into do their own individual jet briefs. Very normal stuff for all of us. And it's go to bed. Now it's like in those moments of like go to bed. So I go back after everybody's gone. I go back in to check email, check SIPRnet, my SIPR email one more time. And I have an email from the AMC commander, 4-star general, not directly to me. She sent it to somebody. That somebody sent it to me. And it was expressing her or their discomfort with the plan that was to be executed. Specifically with what we had decided on as the min force. The min force is a big deal. The minimum force required to begin the operation. And so you want your minimum force to be as small as possible. The larger your min force is, the harder it is to get off the ground, right? More is likely to go wrong, especially when you're dealing with airplanes. Yep. And so even though I had those 3 extra C-17s, we decided, the GFC really decided, General Donoghue, his mission, that the min force, obviously recommendations from us, the min force is going to be 5 C-17s. We can accomplish this mission with 5 C-17s. Everything else is bonus. We want 8, but we only need 5. And of course, the risk is if you declare the min force of being 8, that one of them breaks, and now the whole mission is scrapped, right? The entire mission is scrapped before it starts. This is a significant call. And I get this email from 4-star saying she wants the min force to be 7. C-17. She was willing to forego the empty C-17, but she wanted the maintenance risk kits and the CCAT team, the medical to go with it. And, fine, we can have that conversation, but not right now. Where were you 2 days ago when we're in the throes of planning for this operation? Not to mention the fact that you're 6,000 miles away. And I am thinking about this, and I'm like, you're not even in the chain of command. You're not in the chain of command.
You're supporting force, right? Your job is to provide assets.
Provide assets.
Also, this is a term that I love is GICL, right? Good idea, cutoff line.
Yeah.
In any of these large planning exercises, there's always a GICL. And it could be the best idea in the world, but it was 2 days ago. We're past the GICL. Not happening.
Yeah, this is crazy. I
That's
was mad about it too, and I'm thinking all right, all the things that I got to do now. I got to call General Donoghue. Probably sleeping already, Shit's going down tomorrow. He probably wasn't sleeping. like, this is like a big change, man. I gotta like light the tree. Like, I'm gonna be here for hours. And then I also
The
thought that,
CFAC is, I mean, the CFAC owns this, right?
not really. That was
Essentially.
another problem I had was where was the CFAC? It's crazy. CFAC was
Because, I mean,
not involved. Who was in charge? Lines of
but
authority.
in theory, though, right? I mean, the way it should be, the CFAC owns the air assets, right?
Yeah. Except in the case of C-17s, man, there's some weird stuff going on.
Yeah. Okay.
Like we don't chop or cut to them, but we're sort of owned by the Army. Not really. We're owned by Transcom. Here's like the real thing. Here's why the CFAC doesn't own C-17s, because Transcom will never gives up authority. Never chops, we call it.
Okay.
Transfer of authority over there. So it's really Transcom that owns C-17s, but nobody from Transcom was involved in any of this planning. I never talked to anybody from there. I never talked to the CFAC one time. He popped on for the final briefing. Never asked a question about C-17s. C-17s. As a matter of fact, in the final briefing, in the final airflow briefing, this is also not a joke. In the final airflow briefing, earlier that day, before I briefed all my crews, it's a packed room. 20 airplanes, a lot of people. Every colonel with wings at Al-Udeid is in this meeting, of course. Naturally. And I walk in, so I brought all my aircraft command. I brought the 8 aircraft commanders. Wasn't room for all the crews, but I wanted them in there for the briefing, So I walk in, and the MPC chief is a major, an F-15 guy, super good dude. Him and I have been working together, obviously, pretty closely. And he's sitting at the head of the table, and I'm like sitting right next to him. I'm a C-17. I'm the air mission commander. I'm the air mission commander for this operation. There isn't like a title higher than mine. And I walk in, and this colonel, and I grab my seat, and this colonel goes, "Do you need to be sitting here?" And I was like, "Wow." I was like, "Hey, man, I'm just here to answer questions." And so he lets me sit there. Oh, it's unbelievable. I could if I wasn't so mission, I was super mission focused too. So I was very easily able to shed all the BS. I did not care. I didn't care about this guy. I care about the major telling me that the Air Mike Charlie should be an AWACS guy. I'm like, you guys don't know anything. I know what's going on. Just leave me alone. Let me go execute my mission. Yeah, I'm in mission mindset. As a matter of fact, of the people in this room, I'm the only person actually going flying tomorrow. So I really don't care about any of you guys, But I sit through this briefing. It's an hour-long briefing, and this is not exaggerating. The word C-17 did not come up one time. Not one time.
How is that even?
Not one time.
Why, how is that even possible?
I don't know. It was because we were really. I'll get if I'm going to cut any slack to that group. It was my plan was tight with the Army. We knew it was happening. We almost had a separate NPC for the actual mission, and this was very much about the airflow and the stack and the deconfliction and stuff like that. And there was a lot of hype. People were excited about going to execute a big mission like this. And I just didn't care. Once we had established the deconfliction line in the sky, I just didn't care. Yeah, that actually came up one time. Some guy was one guy who did appreciate my job was asking me a bunch of questions, and I was like, I just got back. It was a super long day, and I was like, man, can I be honest with you? And the NPC chief F-15 guy's like, you don't care about this at all, do you? I'm like, I trust you guys. Let's delegate, some lines amongst us. I'm gonna communicate with AWACS. Here's the radio frequency I'm going to be on. You guys know how to get a hold of me. You guys keep this airspace. My brain can't handle everything. Here's what I can control. And then after that, I need to be asking questions real time. And so it was great. That's how it should be, I think. I know no misunderstandings that in my role as air mission commander that I was going to be running the entire air picture. I do not have the brainwaves for that. I'm so focused on what's happening on the ground, where the danger is, where the mission is, if you ask me. That it was easy for me to shed that stuff. So I wasn't even offended when I was in there. I wasn't offended by the fact that we didn't talk C-17s this meeting. It's just an interesting note to me that all the C-17s got laugh about like nothing. Maybe the whole NPC briefing.
I can completely see it though too. It's everything we've always done, right? It's pushing across the line, and this is how we're fighting. It's not like you mentioned before. It's not the reverse order of we're leaving. We never leave anywhere, and we always leave a presence.
That's right.
So no one knows. Oh yeah, now, but
yeah. Well, let me close the loop on the 4-star thing. So how I got with this. This is my favorite, one of my most proud moments of this entire mission. So we did the NPC brief. We don't talk about C-17. And then I go brief all my crews like it's World War II theater. Like I love it. We're all hyped. We all go eat. Like it's it. It's over. Everybody's like in bed, or everybody's in pregame focus. If you've ever been an athlete, you're now in this mode. Like the big game is tomorrow, and everybody deals with it however they deal with it. And so I get this email, and I sit there thinking about how much work it's going to be, how long I'm going to be in this building, and then I realize like she's not even in the chain of command, and she's wrong. 4 stars wrong. So I just removed my SIPR token and closed my laptop and walked away. And I never told a single person about that email until later, until I got home.
Yeah, it's over.
I still have that email. Saved it. Made sure I saved it. But yeah,
good.
Yeah, like this is nonsense. You know, I love it. And it obviously never came. We got off the ground with all 8 C-17, so it never became an issue. But I almost wish it did. I almost wish it did become an issue.
Yeah.
Why you guys only take off with 6? Like you didn't meet in force. And then I'd be like, well, I decided.
We're not
doing that. That was really good. And then I went back, and probably the last little story I have, back to the pregame. Tomorrow's a big game. Tomorrow's like the Super Bowl, right? Like you're nervous, everybody thinking about it, and you start. If you're like me, like I start second guessing everything. Can we think of everything? What about this? What about this? Run through it all, and eventually you just got to be like, the plan is the plan at this point. Even if we forgot something, the plan is the plan. We were good. I trust everybody. I need to escape from this. Coincidentally, August 30th, 29th, maybe I forget. The NFL season's about to start. The last thing that I did before I went to bed, like my last bit of preparation for this mission, I did a fantasy football draft. Using the Wi-Fi on my phone with a bunch of buddies back home who had no idea what I was doing. Right? They had no idea. A bunch of Air Force guys. And I remember them, a couple days later, after the mission, they found out that, what my role was. And they were like, wait a minute. Weren't we doing a fantasy football draft? Like you were doing a fantasy football draft like right before the mission? And I was like, yeah, this was like therapy for a little bit of break. The Wi-Fi sucked though, and I had a terrible draft. It was awful. I'm pretty sure I finished. I know I did. I finished dead last in that league that year, man. That was horrible. The thing, the sacrifices we make for America,
these things we do. AP, I mean, a powerful story for me. I learned a lot listening to that. Incredible time to be involved. And then, kind of as you mentioned, I know you did a few other things because you just retired, since then. But again, your entire career, more or less, spent in and around, like most, dealing with contingency operations across the globe. But then to be the last one flying out of Afghanistan, kind of surreal.
Yeah, it's surreal for me too. It's a fun thing to be a part of, though, right? It's what it was awesome to be able to put into execution what we practice all. Very fortunate Absolutely. To be like everybody else, man. Right place, right time.
Right place, right time, right qualifications.
Yeah, right place, right time.
I got 2 things fire across the bow here, and then if you're willing to hang around for a There I Was story, I would appreciate it. But man, we've hit a lot. I want to appreciate or respect your time. But two questions, party shots. 1, where can people find you? What are you doing today? So if they're trying to seek you out. And then 2, if you found 15, 16-year-old AP walking down the street, is there any advice you would give him?
Yeah, I'll answer that first one, or the second question first. My advice to my younger self would be actually not to change anything. Like I have no regrets about the past. It has not been perfect by far. None of life is, but my family's amazing. I live in a great place. Great time of my life. Married to my best friend, have 2 amazing kids who are in high school, and I would not change anything to be able to have what I have today. And I think the journey, all the stumbling along the way, probably pretty critical to winding up to where we are now. So we're a very happy, content family living in Charleston. I wouldn't change any of that. So that's what I tell myself is hey, buckle up. It's going to be a fun ride. It's going to be a fun ride.
Love it.
what I'm doing now, so just retiring, started working for a leadership consulting firm called Victory Strategies, which is made up of some pretty elite people. I often question what I'm doing on this team. I mean, we're talking about a couple retired 4-star generals, a bunch of fighter pilots with some amazing stories themselves. A lot of DFCs actually in this group of people that I'm a part of. Our CEO is a Navy SEAL. We've got Fortune 500 executives. Olympic athletes are part of this team. It's not a very big team. And so we do a lot of leadership coaching and speaking as well. And I'm just getting into the professional speaking, talking about this, sort of the lessons learned from the battlefield in Afghanistan, learning how to lead and thrive in chaos. So best place to find me is on LinkedIn. And then there's a connection through LinkedIn to all the stuff that I'm doing. Appreciate you asking.
Yeah, perfect. I'll link that stuff down below in the description for those who are listening. But AP, I appreciate you joining me on the podcast. It was an honor to be able to talk to you, and just great hearing some of the stuff that, is not necessarily well known. And I know people are going to enjoy learning a little bit more. We're rolling up on the second anniversary of the withdrawal from Afghanistan. So crazy stuff. Thanks for joining me.